How did Harvey Weinstein go from being the most powerful man in Hollywood to spending the rest of his life behind bars? What secrets were hidden behind the glittering red carpets and Oscar-winning films? How did one man control careers, silence victims, and build an empire of fear for decades? Who were the brave survivors that risked everything to speak out? What really happened inside those hotel rooms that turned meetings into nightmares? Why did it take so long for Hollywood and the world to listen? How did Weinstein's New York conviction in 2020 change everything? Why did Los Angeles add another 16 years to his sentence in 2022, even into 2025? Why is Weinstein still fighting in court? What is he afraid of losing? Is this story just about Harvey Weinstein, or about the power structures that protected him for so long? And ultimately, what will Harvey Weinstein's true legacy be? The films he made, or the voices he tried to silence? Let's find out. Speaking of cameras that capture the unthinkable, Harvey Weinstein, once the untouchable king of Hollywood, now shackled, frail, and powerless. The man who once decided careers with the wave of his hand, who turned actors into legends and movies into Oscar gold, was now a convicted criminal. In New York, in Los Angeles, facing decades behind bars. But this story isn't just about a fallen mogul. It's about the women who stood in the shadows for years. Women whose voices were silenced by fear, by power, by an entire system designed to protect predators like him. He didn't deal in narcotics or weapons. His currency was power, careers, and fame. And like any kingpin, he demanded loyalty, silence, and obedience no matter the cost. For decades, whispers floated through Hollywood corridors, stories exchanged in hushed voices, rumors that never reached the light of day, because to speak against him was to risk everything. But in 2017, the whispers became a roar. The fortress Harvey Weinstein built began to crumble, brick by brick, testimony by testimony, headline by headline. And yet, even as the verdict was read, even as his empire collapsed, a chilling question remained. How did the most powerful man in Hollywood fall so hard? And what secrets are still hidden in the shadows? To understand this downfall, we need to go back, far back, to where the empire began, before the scandals, before the headlines, before the fall. To understand Harvey Weinstein's empire, we must go back to a different New York, an era of grit, ambition, and hunger. Long before the courtrooms, long before the headlines, there was simply a young man from Queens, desperate to climb. Harvey Weinstein was born in 1952 in Flushing, Queens. The son of Max and Miriam Weinstein, Harvey grew up in a working-class Jewish family. His father worked as a diamond cutter, his mother a homemaker. Harvey wasn't a star athlete. He wasn't the most popular kid, but he had something else, an insatiable need to be noticed, to be powerful. In the early 1970s, Harvey and his younger brother Bob began producing rock concerts in Buffalo, New York. They named their company Harvey and Corky Productions, and through grit and hustle, they brought in acts like Frank Sinatra, the Rolling Stones, and The Who. For Harvey, these concerts weren't just about music. They were about control. He learned how to pull strings behind the scenes, how to turn influence into money, and how to bend people to his will. But concerts weren't enough. Harvey had bigger dreams. With Bob, he created Miramax, named after their parents, Miriam and Max. At first, Miramax distributed small films, often foreign or independent. But Harvey had a gift, not just for spotting talent, but for selling it. He could take a tiny film and turn it into a cultural event, and Hollywood noticed. By the 1980s, Miramax was redefining independent cinema. Harvey turned art house films into mainstream hits. My Left Foot, starring Daniel Day-Lewis, put Miramax on the map. Sex, Lies, and Videotape won awards at Cannes. Harvey became known as the Kingmaker, the man who could turn obscurity into stardom. But behind closed doors, whispers already followed him. His temper was volcanic, his bullying legendary. Crew members, assistants, even directors spoke of Harvey's rages. But in Hollywood, power excused everything. As long as the movies won, nobody questioned the man behind them. By the 1990s, Harvey Weinstein was no longer the outsider from Queens. He was Hollywood royalty. Miramax was a machine of Oscars. In 1998, Shakespeare in Love stunned the industry, beating Saving Private Ryan for Best Picture. That victory wasn't just luck. It was Harvey's doing. He rewrote the rules of Oscar campaigning: aggressive lobbying, endless parties, constant media blitzes. He didn't just play the game. He owned it, and the Academy bowed to his power. But power like Harvey's didn't just come from talent. It came from fear. He could make a career or destroy it. Actresses, assistants, journalists, they all felt his reach. There were rumors, yes, whispers of hotel meetings, of young women pressured into silence. But Hollywood was an empire built on secrets, and Harvey was its emperor. Time magazine once called him the most powerful man in Hollywood. He walked red carpets flanked by the biggest stars in the world. To the public, Harvey Weinstein was a genius. To insiders, he was something else, a storm. Some saw him as a bully. Others saw him as a predator. But nobody dared to say it out loud, because in Hollywood silence was survival. The empire grew. By the mid-2000s, Miramax had become a juggernaut. Harvey and Bob left to create the Weinstein Company, and the success continued. Oscars, billions at the box office, the loyalty of A-list actors and directors. But like a drug cartel boss, Harvey wasn't content with success. He wanted absolute control. Over films, over people, over women, and the darker side of his empire was about to surface. Because while Hollywood celebrated his genius, behind those hotel doors, a nightmare was unfolding. A nightmare that would take decades to be revealed. Harvey Weinstein was not a lone predator operating in the shadows. He commanded an empire that protected him, enabled him, and silenced anyone who dared to challenge his power. Like any cartel boss, Harvey had an army. Assistants arranged meetings in hotel suites. Lawyers drafted airtight contracts and non-disclosure agreements. Publicists buried rumors before they reached the papers. And powerful allies in Hollywood, directors, actors, studio executives, looked the other way, so long as the hits kept coming. If whispers spread, they were quickly buried. If complaints arose, they were smothered with settlements. Survivors were paid off, silenced, bound by contracts that forbade them from speaking a word. And all the while, Harvey's image remained intact. The genius producer, the kingmaker, the man with the golden touch. But behind the closed doors of hotel rooms in Cannes, in London, in Los Angeles, Harvey's empire was built on fear. Young actresses lured by promises of auditions found themselves cornered. Assistants sent to deliver scripts often became witnesses to something much darker. And nearly everyone stayed silent. Because in Hollywood, silence was survival. Speak out, and you'd lose your career. Speak out, and you'd be blacklisted. For every actress who dreamed of stardom, Harvey was the gatekeeper. And the message was clear: obey or disappear. And yet, the whispers kept resurfacing. Journalists heard them. Crew members spoke quietly about them. But nothing made it to print. Some stories were killed before they ever saw daylight. Some editors were pressured. Some reporters intimidated. Harvey's lawyers worked tirelessly to silence the truth before it spread. And then there were the investigators. Former intelligence agents, private operatives, hired to track reporters, to intimidate sources, to follow women who dared to speak out. The empire wasn't just about making films. It was about control, total control. Again and again, survivors were cornered into silence. Non-disclosure agreements became weapons, shackling women into silence with the threat of financial ruin if they ever broke them. Harvey didn't just buy silence. He engineered it. To the outside world, Weinstein was the life of the party, the jovial, powerful producer. But behind the smiles, behind the flashing cameras, a hidden world festered. A world protected by lawyers, agents, executives, and even friends. The empire was rotten, but it stood tall. And so, for decades, the story stayed hidden. Everyone knew, and yet no one spoke. because Harvey's reach extended everywhere. He didn't just control films. He controlled destinies. And to betray him was to gamble with your future. But secrets don't stay buried forever. And when the cracks in Harvey's fortress began to show, the truth would finally claw its way to the surface, unleashing the storm Hollywood could no longer contain. For decades, those hotel doors concealed the darkest chapters of Harvey Weinstein's empire. Behind them, dreams were shattered, voices were silenced, and countless women carried scars the world would not see for years. The stories followed a haunting pattern: a private meeting, framed as a professional opportunity, a script to discuss, a role to offer. But once inside, the atmosphere shifted, the door locked, the promises dissolved, and fear took its place. Some women described massages they never wanted. Others said he blocked the exits, demanding obedience. For some, it was violence. For others, relentless pressure and intimidation. And almost always, there was silence afterward, enforced by shame, by threats, by legal contracts designed to bury the truth. For years, these women lived in the shadows. Some left Hollywood altogether. Others carried the weight in silence, terrified of what speaking out would cost them. Because speaking against Harvey didn't just mean losing a job. It meant losing everything: your career, your reputation, even your safety. And while these women suffered in silence, Harvey thrived. His films won Oscars. His name dominated headlines. He was celebrated as a genius, a visionary. The world applauded him, even as survivors tried desperately to warn others in whispers that never left private rooms. Every industry has its open secrets, and in Hollywood, Harvey's predation was one of them. Assistants whispered warnings to newcomers: never meet him alone. Agents told clients to be careful, but stopped short of refusing him. The machinery of silence kept grinding forward, until one day cracks appeared. Journalists had tried before. Whispers reached newsroom desks as early as the 1990s. But every attempt at exposure was smothered. Editors pulled stories. Lawyers threatened lawsuits. Victims, terrified, backed out at the last second. Harvey's machine of intimidation worked until it didn't. In 2017, investigative reporter Ronan Farrow began digging deeper than anyone before him. At the same time, journalists at the New York Times chased leads of their own. For months, they knocked on doors, collected testimony, reviewed documents. It was a cat-and-mouse game, with Harvey's lawyers and investigators shadowing their every move. The stakes could not have been higher, because for Harvey Weinstein, exposure meant the end. And slowly, the silence broke. One by one, survivors came forward. Brave voices that had been suppressed for decades finally spoke the truth. Their testimonies were raw, painful, undeniable. And once recorded, there was no going back. On October 5, 2017, the first article dropped. The world gasped. For decades, Harvey had bought silence. Now the truth was screaming from the front page of the New York Times. And days later, the New Yorker added more, with chilling, detailed accounts that left no room for denial. The fortress Harvey had built began to crumble. Within days, more women came forward. Famous actresses, unknown assistants, industry veterans, all telling stories that mirrored each other with disturbing precision. The whispers had become a roar, and Hollywood could no longer ignore the monster in its midst. In just weeks, Harvey went from the most powerful producer in Hollywood to its most infamous pariah. His company cut ties. His board ousted him. Friends disappeared. And across the world, the hashtag #MeToo exploded like wildfire, igniting a movement that transcended Hollywood itself. But the headlines were only the beginning. The survivors had spoken. The journalists had revealed the truth. But justice, that would require something Harvey Weinstein had avoided for decades: a courtroom. The fortress had fallen. The silence was shattered. And now, for the first time in history, Harvey Weinstein would stand trial. When Harvey Weinstein's crimes broke into the open, it did more than topple one man. It detonated a movement. A single phrase, "Me Too," became a rallying cry, echoing across the world as millions of women shared their stories of harassment, assault, and silence. From the gilded red carpets of Los Angeles to ordinary workplaces in small towns, women broke their silence. Actresses like Ashley Judd, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Salma Hayek shared what they had endured at Weinstein's hands. Their voices unlocked countless others. The world was listening, and for the first time, the silence was broken. What had been an open secret in Hollywood became a global reckoning. Institutions, corporations, entire industries faced a tidal wave of accusations. Powerful men, once untouchable, were called out, investigated, and forced to face accountability. Harvey Weinstein's downfall had sparked something larger, a demand for justice that could not be ignored. Meanwhile, Harvey's empire collapsed overnight. His name was scrubbed from company walls. Investors fled. Employees resigned. The Weinstein Company filed for bankruptcy. Decades of power, prestige, and wealth evaporated in weeks. He was no longer king. He was a fugitive of public opinion, scrambling to cling to what little influence remained. In public, he was heckled. In private, he was abandoned. Friends who once toasted him at premieres now refused to take his calls. The predator who thrived in silence was now dragged into the light, exposed, humiliated, despised. But headlines weren't enough. Survivors wanted justice, and that meant Harvey Weinstein, for the first time in his life, had to face a jury of his peers. The trial of Harvey Weinstein began in New York in January 2020. It was a spectacle unlike anything Hollywood had ever seen. The producer who once commanded studios now sat hunched in a courtroom, his fate in the hands of strangers. The prosecution brought forward 6 women to testify, each describing how Weinstein cornered, pressured, or assaulted them. Their voices were steady, but the weight of their stories hung in the air. The defense painted another picture, claiming the encounters were consensual, that Weinstein was being punished for his fame and influence. It was a brutal battle, and the world watched, waiting. Outside the courthouse, protests erupted daily. Survivors carried signs. Reporters camped on sidewalks. The trial wasn't just about Harvey Weinstein. It was about every woman who had been told to stay silent. The courtroom became a stage for a cultural reckoning. For weeks, testimony piled up. Evidence was presented. Jurors listened. And then came the waiting. Would Weinstein escape accountability once again, shielded by money and lawyers? Or would the most powerful producer in Hollywood finally be held to account? On February 24th, 2020, the verdict was read. Harvey Weinstein was found guilty of rape in the 3rd degree and criminal sexual assault. As the words echoed in the courtroom, Harvey sat motionless, stunned. Decades of intimidation, manipulation, and silence had ended with 2 simple words: guilty, convicted. Survivors wept. Advocates embraced. The crowd outside erupted in cheers. For the first time, Harvey Weinstein was not the untouchable mogul. He was an inmate, awaiting sentencing. And when that day came, the judge delivered a crushing blow. 23 years in prison. The man who once reigned over Hollywood's golden stage was now destined to spend what remained of his life behind cold, steel bars. Or so it seemed. Because even as he sat convicted in New York, Harvey Weinstein's story was not over. Another courtroom, another set of survivors, and another battle for justice awaited. And this time, the walls of his empire would come crashing down even further. If New York was the fall, Los Angeles was the reckoning. In 2022, Harvey Weinstein was wheeled once again into a courtroom, this time on the opposite coast. The City of Stars, the same place that once celebrated his films, was about to write the final chapter in his downfall. But frailty would not spare him. Dozens of women had come forward across the years, and 4 took the stand in Los Angeles. Women who described luxury hotels turned into prisons, meetings that became nightmares. The testimony was harrowing. One woman described being trapped in a Beverly Hills hotel suite. Another said she froze as he blocked the door. Their words painted a pattern too precise. too haunting to be coincidence. For weeks, the trial unfolded, a second theater of justice. And when the jury returned, they spoke with finality. Guilty. Harvey Weinstein was sentenced to 16 more years. But Harvey Weinstein did not go quietly into history. From his prison cell, he launched appeal after appeal, desperate, clinging to the only weapon he had left, the law. He argued technicalities. He challenged testimonies. His lawyers claimed bias, misconduct, unfair rulings. And into 2025, his name still lingered in headlines, not for films, not for accolades, but for desperate attempts to rewrite his ending. But the world had changed. The balance of power had shifted. No appeal, no technicality could erase what had been uncovered. The silence had been broken, and it would never return. Harvey Weinstein will likely spend the rest of his life in prison. Once a king of Hollywood, now reduced to inmate number, stripped of power, stripped of legacy. But this story was never just about Harvey Weinstein. It was about the women who risked everything to tell the truth. Women whose voices sparked a global movement, whose courage reshaped industries, whose strength ignited a reckoning that reached far beyond Hollywood. The world listened. The world changed. And though the movement has faced backlash, criticism, and complex debates, one truth remains. The fortress of silence was shattered. Harvey Weinstein's legacy will not be his films. It will not be the Oscars he collected, the careers he built, or the empire he once ruled. His true legacy is the courage of the voices he tried to silence, and the movement he could not stop. Thank you for staying with me till the very end of the story here on True Crime Arena. If you found this deep dive into the Harvey Weinstein crime insightful, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep uncovering the darkest true crime stories with the detail and care they deserve. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next case we explore together. Until then, stay curious, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next story.